Mediterranean dioceses. And we hear a greeting from the audience, from those partaking in these meetings from Africa. We'll hear first from the Cardinal Archbishop of Marseille, Jean-Marc Aveline. Then we'll have a video presentation followed by an address by a bishop and a young person. We see also in attendance the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. Everyone has now taken their seats here.
Très Saint-Père,
Most Holy Father, Mr. President of the Republic,
Mesdames, Messieurs, chers amis,
ladies and gentlemen, dear friends,
de vous accueillir ce
it gives me
matin
great
dans ce
pleasure
bel amphithéâtre
to welcome you this morning
pour cette séance
to the beautiful amphitheater of the Palais du Faro for the closing session of the Rencontre Méditerranée de Marseille. Thank you, Mr. President of the Republic, for honoring us with your presence in this city that you love, on this day when receiving the Holy Father and also representatives from all over France and from all the countries of the Mediterranean. It finds itself precisely in a deep vocation, a call, that of being a bridge linking North and South, Europe and the Mediterranean, a gateway to the East and a gateway to the West. Or as you have said, Most Holy Father, during the Angelus last Sunday, a gateway to hope. I would particularly like to thank the Mayor of Marseille for his welcome to this prestigious site and for the very important role the city of Marseille has played in organizing this pontifical visit. Around you, Most Holy Father, are bishops who have come to take part in these meetings from the 5 shores of the Mediterranean, North Africa, the Middle East, the Black Sea, the Balkans, and Latin Europe.
À Marseille, on sait que l'identité ne peut se
Also, in the assembly are students and young professionals from the same countries. Who have been invited to come and work for a week in Marseille to help the bishops. We've moved by your deep sense of compassion of the countries currently facing the most trying tragedies.
En provenance des 5 rives de la Méditerranée, l'Afrique du Nord, le Proche-Orient, la mer Noire, les Balkans, l'Europe latine. Nos échanges depuis mercredi.
Our exchanges since Wednesday evening have enabled us to continue to get to know each other following our meetings in Bari and Florence, and to address together the major challenges of our pastoral mission in the service of the peoples of the Mediterranean. We are all delighted that you were able to join us in prayer and reflection, to encourage us and point the way forward. The Mediterranean faces so many challenges. Also in the assembly are young people, students and young professionals from the same countries, from all denominations and religions, who've been invited to come and work for a week to help the bishops refine their analysis of the situation and consider what concrete initiatives should be taken. In these 2 days, they've been very fruitful, and Holy Father, we are touched by your concern for the peoples they represent in the diversity of their cultures and religions. And we are moved this morning by a deep sense of compassion for the countries currently facing the most trying tragedies, whether due to war or natural disaster: Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Ukraine, and Armenia, to name but a few.
et tranquille. Sont également présents dans notre Assemblée non seulement Monsieur le Président de la République française,
Also present in our assembly are not only the President of the French Republic and some of his ministers, but also local and national politicians,
dans la région sud,
whom I gratefully welcome, in particular the presidents of the region, the department, and the metropolis, who have contributed greatly to the preparation of this great event. Thank you very much.
la présence dans notre Assemblée
I would also like to draw your attention to the presence in our assembly of members of the diplomatic corps, of whom there are many in Marseille, as well as civil society players committed to serving the people of the Mediterranean, particularly on the issues of malnutrition, education, access to water, and many other areas.
de remercier tout particulièrement
I'd like to extend my special welcome to the sponsors who have helped us create
Marseille en grand, Monsieur le Président, mais
not a Marseille en Grande, Mr. President, but for these exceptional days, Marseille en Très Grand,
depuis la
and not a grand Marseille, but an even greater Marseille, in other words, on a global scale.
a permis de rassembler
Since Monday, a major cultural, associative, spiritual, ecumenical, interreligious festival has brought together a large number of people for concerts, conferences, plays, and a village set up on the cathedral esplanade.
près de 600 personnes en
Last night, a major solidarity banquet was held, welcoming almost 600 people in precarious circumstances for a meal offered by several of the city's restaurants and served by volunteers from numerous associations,
très Saint-Père.
both believers and unbelievers.
Enfin, il y a dans l'Assemblée la grande majorité des évêques de France. Et je tiens à les saluer.
Last but not least, the vast majority of France's bishops are in attendance.
Que ce déplacement à Marseille, axé sur la Méditerranée, ne constituait pas
But as I said to you recently,
officiel en
France, through its bishops and many pilgrims, is happy to come and pray with you, listen to you, and learn to look at the Mediterranean with you.
la France, à travers ses évêques et bon nombre de pèlerins. C'est elle qui est venue prier avec vous. C'est elle qui voulait vous écouter et surtout apprendre à regarder avec vous la Méditerranée, apprendre à se décentrer d'elle-même en prenant conscience des drames.
We are happy to listen to you and learn to look at the Mediterranean with you, becoming aware of the tragedies that occur there, and reflect on our country's responsibility towards this part of the world that is part of its history and geography.
À travers Marseille, en nous aidant à regarder avec vous la Méditerranée. Très Saint-Père, soyez profondément remerciés. Cher Pape François, nous allons maintenant regarder avec vous une petite vidéo qui retrace quelques moments forts de cette
Most Holy Father, dear Pope Francis, will now watch a video with you recounting some of the highlights of this week. Then we'll listen to a bishop and a young man share with you the conclusions of our work, and above all, we'll listen to you once again. Thank you very much for being with us.
que nous avons commencé au service des sociétés et des peuples dans lesquels l'Église est haute sur tous les pays de la Méditerranée.
Bishop has been going off script.
Vous en étiez d'accord d'une conférence ecclésiale de la Méditerranée. Il faut que nous trouvions des moyens. Il faut que nous trouvions des moyens. Au nom de tous, très Saint-Père, merci infiniment
In the name of everyone, many thanks
à tous les artistes
for being with us and encouraging us.
qui sont ici avec nous ce matin. Grazie, Santo Padre.
And he concluded with the words in Italian, "Thank you, Your Holiness." The Cardinal Archbishop of Marseille here, Jean-Marc Aveline, greeting our Holy Father after these words of greeting, and now we too will watch the film that has been prepared.
Preghiamo il Signore affinché muova e
Let us pray to the Lord that everyone might be moved to overcome the logic of conflict, of hate, and of revenge, in order to find ourselves brothers, children of one sole Father, who makes his sun rise on the good and the bad. We're seeing images of people arriving and some of the events that have taken place. We invoke the Holy Spirit. We call on the Holy Spirit that each one of us, through daily gestures, might contribute to build new relationships inspired by understanding, welcome, patience, placing ourselves in conditions to be able to experience the joy of the gospel and to spread it in every place of our life.
Vergine Maria,
May the Virgin Mary, the star of the sea, to whom we turn as the greatest example of faithfulness to Jesus and his word, help us to walk on this path.
Merci aux équipes de Med 23 pour la réalisation de ce film, en particulier Astrid Desjobins.
Thank you to the team for having created this film.
Nous accueillons maintenant Maria Serena Bonazzi del Poghetto, qui est italienne.
And we will now hear a testimony from Maria Serena,
Entre les jeunes et les évêques du bassin méditerranéen.
and then we'll be hearing from a bishop from one of the Mediterranean dioceses. First, Maria Serena, who's from Italy.
Buongiorno Santo Padre, buongiorno a tutti.
Good day, Holy Father. Good day to everyone. My name is Maria Serena. I am Italian, but for 2 years I've been living in Greece with the John the 23rd community, first in Lesbos and now in Athens. In Athens, I live in a group home, a family that has decided to welcome under their own roof and to share life with those who are most in need. Specifically now, we live with migrants. We're not professionals. We're not doctors, psychologists, or anything else. So what we're trying to do is simply to offer others who we are, with all of our limitations. But perhaps that is the key, to treat each other truly as brothers and sisters. By being with those who are poor, we realize that we too are poor. We all possess poverty, and we all need others. We need to share what we are without a lot of talk or without having degrees or special skills, simply welcoming each other. As you've said, Your Holiness, in your visit to the island of Lesbos, to reject the poor means rejecting peace. Whoever rejects the poor, whoever rejects a brother or a sister, rejects peace. And I would say, closes doors and also rejects the Spirit. A beautiful thing I've experienced during these days, something that I carry with me that I've put into words, is this: let the Spirit flow. When we reject others, when we close doors, when we build walls and barriers, we close doors not only to our brothers and sisters, but also to the Spirit, to God's Spirit, or to God. And in these days, I've really seen that the Spirit is at work in each person. Although all of us, young people and bishops who are here, come from very different backgrounds. I've received witnesses from people who really have hope and allow the Spirit to work in them, everyone in a very specific and wonderful way. In these days, I think I've experienced a miracle in such few days. In addition to working and developing proposals, we've developed fraternity, a fraternity that touches the 5 shores of the Mediterranean. A Mediterranean that really needs to live fraternity and to spread it everywhere because, and I'd like to emphasize this, the Mediterranean now can no longer be a cemetery, but it's a real crime scene against humanity, and we have to shout this out strongly, to shout it out without losing hope. Because as I said, there are so many signs of hope, and this assembly of young people and bishops together is an example of this hope. So we shouldn't be afraid. Let's let the Spirit flow. Let's spread hope and help each other to do this. For only if we have hope will we be moved to meet, to dialogue, and engage in concrete action. Thank you. We've been hearing Maria Serena. Now she is going to greet our Holy Father. Thank you, Maria Serena. And now we're welcoming Bishop Arhan Dojaz, who is the Bishop of Tiran Dores in Albania. Your Holiness, from the deepest abyss of the Mediterranean in the time of the communist dictatorship, when I was still a young boy, I went to the Bishop of Tirana Dorazzo, and I experienced personally the coming to light, or the rise of the light of hope. I was born in 1977 in Albania. 10 years before I was born, my country, through its constitution, declared itself atheist, and the churches had been destroyed. Yes, God had been erased in every visible sign. For that reason, I grew up without any religious reference. I saw only my grandmother praying the rosary in front of a barn. Oh, where I first discovered there used to be a church. Even grandfather always prayed in secret. My childhood was characterized by so much poverty, misery, and ideology. Along with this, our families were afraid of being arrested and taken to concentration camps or labor camps or prisons of the regime. My uncle, my mother's brother, was arrested. While all of Albania was like an open-air concentration camp, we Catholics, Muslims, and Orthodox, we lived the synodality of suffering and support, which today has brought the fruit of fraternity and harmony. It's a small child of our people. It's a child of the great saint of our world, Mother Teresa, who brought the love of God and his gospel. After the fall of communism, even I, like many others, crossed the sea and migrated to Italy, where I lived for years. In my experience as a migrant, God overwhelmed me with his generosity through providential encounters and made me rediscover faith through baptism and through a journey of faith lived with a group called the Immaculata. I discovered a vocation to the priesthood. I'm grateful to the Lord and to Our Lady for their presence and their support in all the circumstances of my life, which always and even now as bishop continue to bestow. Mary is always a Stella Maris, the star of the sea. So even today in the Mediterranean, even in difficult storms, even when the sea is calm, she is always the Queen of Peace. May there be peace always. And today there are still so many people living difficult situations. There are also great distances, those faced by our migrant brothers and sisters, those that mark the experience of our people from the social and economic point of view. Migrants bring with them not only many trials, sufferings, and violence they've endured, but above all, they are bearers of a great hope, the hope they hold in their hearts, which gives them the courage to face so many sacrifices and barriers. There are also positive distances related to the richness of the cultural and spiritual diversity of our peoples. In these days in Marseille, as churches and believers of the Mediterranean region, we've experienced this. Here, we've experienced that diversity as a richness produces wealth. It shortens negative distances and nurtures fraternity. Of these days, I retain the certainty that a positive, joyful, and hopeful way of looking at reality makes us credible witnesses of God's style. Fraternal closeness, human compassion, and prophetic tenderness. The experience of the Mediterranean meetings is prophetic, because by allowing a meeting between bishops and young people, this gives rise to the hope that the old shall have dreams and the young visions. The freshness of young people's insights allows the bishops to express their dreams. And the words of the bishops have given more concreteness to the visions of the young people. And in that sense, we think it would be appropriate to continue the Mediterranean meetings, opening ourselves more and more to others and to diversity, pursuing that synodal perspective that you, Holy Father, have pointed out to us as the ecclesial style of our time, what God expects of the third millennium. Dear Holy Father, Our Lady de la Garde, may she protect and guide our church always. Thank you. A current bishop in Albania, who himself has lived as a migrant, sharing his story with us, now participating in this Mediterranean meetings here in Marseille, having lived personally what it's like to be a migrant in this area. We now prepare ourselves for the Pope's discourse. Mr. President of the Republic, dear brother bishops, distinguished mayors and authorities, representing cities and territories bordered on the Mediterranean Sea. Dear friends, I offer my cordial greetings, and I'm grateful to each of you for having accepted the invitation of Cardinal Aveline to participate in these meetings. Thank you for your work and the valuable reflections that you've shared. After Bari and Florence, the journey in service to the Mediterranean peoples is moving forward. Here too, church and civil leaders are gathered, not to deal with mutual interests, but animated by the desire to take care for men and women. Thank you for involving young people who are the present and future of the church and society. Marseille is a very ancient city founded by Greek sailors who came from Asia Minor. Legend traces it back to a love story between an immigrant sailor and a native princess. From its beginnings, it has displayed a diverse and cosmopolitan character. It welcomes the riches of the sea and gives a homeland to those who no longer have one. Marseille tells us that, despite difficulties, coexistence is possible and is a source of joy. On the map, it almost seems to draw a smile between Nice and Montpellier. And I like to think of it that way, that Marseille is the smile of the Mediterranean.
Io vorrei dunque proporvi alcuni
So I'd like to offer you some thoughts centered around three aspects that characterize Marseille: the sea, the port, and the lighthouse. These are three symbols. The sea, a tide of peoples, has made this city a mosaic of hope, with its great multi-ethnic and multicultural tradition, represented by the more than 60 consulates in its territory. Marseille is both a diverse and distinct city, for it is its diversity, the fruit of an encounter with the world, that makes its history distinct. Nowadays, we often hear that Mediterranean history is an intertwining of conflicts between different civilizations, religions, and visions. Let's not ignore the problems, and yet let us not be misled. The exchanges that have taken place between peoples have made the Mediterranean the cradle of salvation, of civilization. A sea overflowing with treasures, to the point that, as a great French historian wrote, it is, quote, not one landscape, but countless landscapes, not one sea, but a succession of seas. For millennia, everything has flowed into it, complicating and enriching its history, unquote. Our sea is a place of encounter among the Abrahamic religions, among Greek, Latin, and Arabic thought, among science, philosophy, and law, and among many other realities. It has conveyed to the world the lofty value of the human being, endowed with freedom, open to truth, and in need of salvation, who sees the world as a wonder to be discovered and as a garden to be inhabited, under the imprint of a God who makes covenants with men and women. A great mayor saw in the Mediterranean not a question of conflict, but a response of peace. Indeed, quote, the beginning and foundation of peace among all the nations of the world, unquote. This, he said, in fact, is, quote, the answer. It's possible if we consider the common and, so to speak, permanent vocation that Providence assigned in the past, assigns in the present, and, in a certain sense, will assign in the future to the peoples and nations who live on the shores of this mysterious and At the time of Christ, the Lake of Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee, had a concentration of various populations, beliefs, and traditions. It was precisely there, in the Galilee of the Gentiles, crossed by the sea route, that the greater part of Jesus' public life took place. A multifaceted and in many ways unstable context was the place for the universal proclamation of the Beatitudes, in the name of a God who is Father of all, who makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. This was also an invitation to broaden the frontiers of the heart, overcoming ethnic and cultural barriers. Here, then, is the answer that comes from the Mediterranean. This perennial Sea of Galilee urges us to oppose the divisiveness of conflicts with the, quote, coexistence of differences, unquote. Our sea, Mare Nostrum, at the crossroads of north and south, east and west, brings together the challenges of the whole world as the five shores on which you have reflected bear witness: North Africa, the Near East, the Black and Aegean Seas, the Balkans, and Latin Europe. It is an outpost of challenges that concern everyone. Let's think of the climate, with the Mediterranean representing a hot spot where changes are felt more quickly. how important it is to safeguard the Mediterranean patchwork, a unique treasure trove of biodiversity. In short, this sea, an environment that offers a unique approach to complexity, is a mirror of the world and bears within itself a global vocation to fraternity. This is the only way to prevent and overcome conflict. Brothers and sisters, amidst today's sea of conflicts, we are here to enhance the contribution of the Mediterranean so that it can return to being a laboratory of peace. For this is its vocation, to be a place where different countries and realities encounter each other on the basis of the humanity we all share, and not on the basis of contrasting ideologies. Indeed, the Mediterranean expresses a way of thinking that is not uniform and ideological, but multifaceted and consistent with the way things are, a vital, open, and accommodating way of thinking. That's the word. One that's communitarian. How greatly we need this at the present juncture, when antiquated and belligerent nationalisms want to make the dream of the community of nations fade. Yet, let us remember this. With weapons we make war, not peace. And with greed for power, we always return to the past. We don't build the future. Where should we begin then in order for peace to take root? On the banks of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus began by giving hope to the poor and proclaimed them blessed. He listened to their needs, healed their wounds, and above all, announced to them the good news of the kingdom. We need to start again from there, from the often silent cry of the least among us, not from the fortunate ones, the first class, who have no need of help yet still raise their voices. Let us, the Church and civil society, start anew by listening to the poor, who should be embraced, not counted, for they are faces, not numbers. The change of direction in our communities lies in treating them as brothers and sisters whose story we know, not as troublesome problems that we want to send back home. It lies in welcoming them, not hiding them, integrating them, not evicting them, and giving them dignity. And I'd like to repeat that Marseille is the capital of the integration of people. This should be your pride. Today, the sea of human coexistence is polluted by instability, which even assails beautiful Marseille. Where there is instability, there is crime. When there is a lack of work together with material, educational, cultural, and religious poverty, the path is open for gangs and illicit trafficking. The commitment of institutions alone is not enough. We need a jolt of conscience to say no to lawlessness, and yes to solidarity, which is not a drop in the ocean, but is the indispensable element for purifying the waters. Indeed, the real social evil is not so much the increase of problems, but the decrease of care. Who nowadays becomes a neighbor to young people left to themselves, who are so easy prey for crime and prostitution? Who takes care of them? Who is close to people enslaved by work that should make them freer? Who cares for the frightened families, afraid of the future and of bringing children into the world? Who's listening to the groaning of our isolated elderly brothers and sisters, who instead of being appreciated are pushed aside under the false pretenses of a supposedly dignified and sweet death? that is actually more salty than the waters of the sea? Who's thinking of the unborn children rejected in the name of a false right to progress, which is instead a retreat into the selfish needs of the individual? Today we have the tragedy of confusing babies with puppies. And one secretary said that going through St. Peter's Square, they've seen a woman who had a baby in a baby carriage, but it wasn't a baby in the end, it was a puppy, and this tells us something. Who's looking with compassion beyond their own shores to hear the cry of pain rising from North Africa and from the Middle East? How many people live immersed in violence and endure situations of injustice and persecution? And here I'm thinking of the many Christians who are frequently forced to leave their homelands or dwell in them without having their rights recognized, not enjoying full citizenship. Please, brothers and sisters, let's commit ourselves so that all who are part of society will be citizens with full rights. Lastly, there is a cry of pain that resonates most of all, and it's turning the Mediterranean, our sea, from the cradle of civilization into the mare mortuum, the graveyard of dignity. It's the stifled cry of our migrant brothers and sisters. I want to devote attention to this cry by reflecting on the second image Marseille offers us, that of its port. First the sea, and the second is its port. The port of Marseille has been a wide-open gateway to the sea, to France, and to Europe for centuries. From here, many have left to find work and a future abroad, and from here, many have passed through the gateway to the continent with luggage laden with hope. Marseille has a large port and is a grand gateway, which cannot be closed. Several Mediterranean ports, on the other hand, have closed, and there are two words that have resounded, fueling people's fears: invasion and emergency, and this is what has closed the ports. Yet those who risk their lives at sea do not invade. They're looking for welcome. They're looking for life. Regarding the emergency, the migratory phenomenon is not so much a short-term urgency, always there to fuel alarmist propaganda, but it's a reality of our times. It's a process that involves 3 continents around the Mediterranean, and that must be governed with wise foresight, including a European response capable of coping with the objective difficulties. I'm looking at this map, the privileged ports, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, and Spain. These are the ports that are open to the Mediterranean and receive immigrants. The RC, Mare Nostrum, cries out for justice with its shores that on the one hand exude affluence, consumerism, and waste, while on the other there is poverty and instability. Here also the Mediterranean mirrors the world, with the south turning to the north, with many developing countries plagued by instability, regimes, wars, and desertification, looking to those that are well off, a globalized world in which we're all connected, but one in which the disparities have never been so wide. Yet this situation is not a novelty of recent years, and it's not this Pope, who came from the other side of the world, to be the first to warn of it with urgency and concern. Rather, the Church has been speaking about it in heartfelt tones for more than 50 years. It was shortly after the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council that St. Paul VI, in his encyclical Populorum Progressio, wrote, quote, "The hungry nations of the world cry out to the peoples blessed with abundance." And the Church cut to the quick by this anguished cry, asks each and every person to hear his brother's plea and answer it lovingly, unquote. Pope Paul listed 3 duties of the more developed nations, quote, stemming from the human and supernatural brotherhood of man, mutual solidarity, that is, the aid that the richer nations must give to developing nations, its duty to social justice, the rectification of trade relations between strong and weak nations, and the third, the duty of universal charity, that is, the effort to build a more human world community for everyone, a world in which everyone could give and receive, where the progress of some isn't bought at the expense of others, unquote. In the light of the gospel and these considerations, Paul VI in 1967 stressed the quote, duty of giving foreigners a hospitable reception, unquote, a duty on which he wrote, quote, we cannot insist too much, unquote. 15 years earlier, Pope Pius XII had encouraged this, writing that, quote, the Holy Family in exile, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph emigrating to Egypt, is the model, the example, and support for all migrants and pilgrims of every time and country, of every refugee of whatever condition, who, whether compelled by persecution or by want, are forced to leave their native land and beloved parents, and to seek a foreign soil, unquote.
Sono sotto gli occhi di tutti le difficoltà nell'accogliere.
Certainly, no one can fail to see the difficulties involved in welcoming, protecting, or accompanied, promoting, and integrating unexpected people. If we don't reach the end, migrants start to orbit the society. They need to be welcomed, protected, promoted, and integrated. This is the style.
È vero che non è facile.
It's true. It's not easy to have this style to welcome and integrate unexpected persons, yet the principal criterion cannot be the preservation of one's own well-being, but rather the safeguarding of human dignity. Those who take refuge in our midst should not be viewed as a heavy burden to be borne. If we consider them instead as brothers and sisters, they will appear above all as gifts. Tomorrow we celebrate the World Day of Migrants and Refugees. May we allow ourselves be moved by the stories of so many of our brothers and sisters in difficulty who have the right both to emigrate and not to emigrate, and not close ourselves in indifference. History is challenging us to make a leap of conscience in order to prevent a shipwreck of civilization, for the future will not lie in being closed, which is a return to the past, a U-turn in the journey of history. In the face of the terrible scourge of the exploitation of human beings, the solution is not to reject, but to ensure, according to the possibilities of each, an ample number of legal and regular entrances. This would be sustainable with an equitable welcome on the part of the European continent in the context of cooperation with the countries of origin, whereas merely crying enough is to close our eyes. To save ourselves today will turn into a tragedy tomorrow, when future generations will thank us if we were able to create the conditions for a necessary integration. Otherwise, they will censure us if we favor only sterile forms of assimilation. Integration, even of migrants, is tiring, but it's far-sighted. We'll either do it together or it won't be done at all.
L'assimilazione
An assimilation that does not take into account differences and remains rigidly fixed in its own paradigms only makes ideas prevail over reality and jeopardizes the future, increasing distances and provoking ghettoization, which in turn sparks hostility and forms intolerance. We need fraternity as much as we need bread. The same word, brother, in its Indo-European etymology, derives from a root associated with nutrition and sustenance. We will support ourselves only by nourishing with hope the most vulnerable, accepting them as brothers and sisters. Do not neglect to show hospitality, Scripture tells us. And in the Old Testament, it's repeated: the widow, the orphan, and the stranger are those in need of charity. To assist the widow, the orphan, and the stranger who's emigrated. In this regard, the port of Marseille is also a door of faith. According to tradition, it was here that Saints Martha, Mary, and Lazarus landed, and then sowed the seed of the gospel in these lands. Faith comes from the sea, as we are reminded by the evocative Marseille tradition of Candlemas and its maritime procession. In the Gospel, Lazarus is Jesus' friend, but also the name of the protagonist of one of his most timely parables, one that opens our eyes to the inequality that corrodes fraternity and speaks to us of the Lord's preference for the poor. As Christians who believe in God made man, in the one inimitable man who on the shores of the Mediterranean called himself the way, the truth, and the life, we cannot accept that the paths of encounter should be closed. Let's not close the path of encounter, please. We cannot accept that the truth of the Lord of Mammon should prevail over human dignity, that life should turn into death. The Church proclaims that God in Jesus Christ, in a certain way, united himself to every man and woman, and believes with John Paul II that humanity is her way. Worship God and serve the most vulnerable, who are his treasures. To adore God and to serve our neighbor, that is what counts. Not social importance or vast numbers, but fidelity to the Lord and to humanity. This is Christian witness. Not much is left. This is Christian witness, and frequently it's even heroic. I think, for example, of Saint Charles de Foucauld, the universal brother of the martyrs of Algeria, but also of all those charitable workers in our day, volunteers. In this scandalously evangelical style of life, the Church discovers the shore port in which to dock and from which to set out in order to weave bonds with the people of every nation, seeking everywhere the traces of the Spirit and offering all that she herself has received by grace. This is the purest reality of the Church. This is, as Bernanos wrote, quote, the Church of the Saints, adding that, quote, this great apparatus of wisdom, strength, elastic discipline, magnificence, and majesty is nothing by itself, unless inspired by charity, unquote. I'm happy to celebrate this particularly French insight, this creative Christian genius that has reaffirmed so many truths through a multitude of actions and writings. Saint Jasarius of Arles said, quote, if you have charity, you have God, and if you have God, what do you lack? Unquote. Pascal recognized that, quote, the sole object of Scripture is charity, unquote, and that, quote, truth apart from charity is not God, but his image and an idol, that one must not love or adore, unquote. And St. John Cassian, who died here, wrote that, quote, everything, even what we consider useful and necessary, is of less value than that good which is peace and charity, unquote. It's right, then, that Christians should be second to none in charity, and that the gospel of charity be the Magna Carta of all pastoral work. We're not called to grieve over times past or to redefine the Church's role in society. We're called to bear witness, not to embroider the gospel with words, but to give it flesh. Not to worry about our visibility, but to spend ourselves in utter gratuity, believing that the measure of Jesus' love without measure. St. Paul, the apostle of the nations, who spent much of his life crossing the Mediterranean region from one port to the other, taught that in order to fulfill the law of Christ, it's necessary to bear one another's burdens. Dear brother bishops, let's not burden others. Let's not increase the weight others bear, but let's relieve their hardships in the name of the gospel of mercy, in order to distribute joyfully the consolation of Jesus to a weary and wounded humanity. May the Church let the Church not be a place of prescription, of legislation, but a port of hope for those who have their confidence. Let's enlarge our heart, please. May the Church be a port of refreshment, where people feel encouraged to embark upon life with the incomparable strength born of Christian joy. That everyone is involved. Let's remember the Lord said this, let everyone come in. I now come to my last image, that of the lighthouse, which sheds it enables us to see the port. What luminous beacons of light can guide the route of the Mediterranean churches? Thinking of the sea which unites so many different believing communities, I think that one can reflect on more cooperative ways forward, perhaps considering also the expediency of a Mediterranean Bishops' Conference. That could offer greater possibilities for regional dialogue and representation. Also thinking of ports and the theme of migration, it could be profitable to work towards a specific pastoral plan that's even more interconnected, so that those dioceses that are more exposed can provide the best spiritual and human assistance to our brothers and sisters who arrive there in great need. The lighthouse in this prestigious palace that bears its name makes me think especially of young people. They are the light that indicates the way of the future, the route toward the future. Marseille is a great university city, home for 4 campuses, 35,000 students, 5,000 of which are foreigners. Where do we start to weave relationships between cultures, if not in the university? There, young people are not attracted by the seductions of power, but by the dream of building the future. Don't extinguish this dream. May the Mediterranean universities be laboratories of dreams and laboratories of the future, where young people mature by encountering one another, coming to know one another, discovering cultures and contexts both near and diverse. In this way, prejudices are dismantled, wounds are healed, and fundamentalist rhetoric is rejected. Be aware of the many fundamentalisms which today are the fad. Young people, well prepared and used to socializing, will be able to open unexpected doors of dialogue. If we want them to devote themselves to the gospel and the lofty service of politics, we first need to be credible, forgetful of ourselves, free from self-referentiality, dedicated to spending ourselves tirelessly for others. Yet the primary challenge of education has to do with every age, starting with children by mixing with others. They can surmount many barriers, overcome preconceptions, and develop their own identity in a context of mutual enrichment. The Church can certainly contribute to this by offering her educational networks and encouraging a creativity of fraternity. Brothers and sisters, the challenge is also one of a Mediterranean theology.
La teologia deve essere radicata nella vita.
Theology needs to be rooted in life. Theology developed in a laboratory doesn't work. The challenge is also one of a Mediterranean theology, capable of developing ways of thinking rooted in reality, a home to human beings and not only technical data, poised to unite generations by linking memory and future, promoting with originality the ecumenical journey of Christians and dialogue between believers of different religions.
È bello avventurarsi in una ricerca filosofica.
How exciting it would be to set out on this adventurous quest, both philosophical and theological, by drawing from the Mediterranean culture sources that can restore hope to men and women, a mystery of freedom in need of God and others in order to give meaning to their lives. It's necessary likewise to reflect on the mystery of God, whom no one can claim to possess or control, and who must instead be preserved from all violent and instrumental misuse, and the awareness that the confession of his grandeur demands of us the humility of seekers. Dear brothers and sisters, I'm happy to be here in Marseille. One time, His Excellency the President invited me to come to France, but at least to come to Marseille. At least I've come to Marseille. I thank you for your patience, your patient listening, and for all your efforts, your dedication. Continue your work. Be a sea of good in order to confront the poverty of today in solidarity and cooperative. Be a welcoming port in order to embrace all who seek a better future. Be a lighthouse of peace in order to pierce through the culture of encounter, the dark abysses of violence and war. Thank you very much. A beautiful discourse of our Holy Father reflecting on the significance of Marseille and the Mediterranean, reflecting on the sea, the port, and the lighthouse from which the palace, the Palais du Foro, takes its name. Everyone now on their feet after hearing the discourse of our Holy Father. Once again, we see the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and the Mayor of Marseille sitting together in the front row. And flanking the Holy Father, religious leaders of various confessions in the Church who have been participating in these discussions. Our Holy Father now inviting them to form an ecclesial conference on the Mediterranean so that the Church can develop better pastoral responses. We'll now hear from the President of the French Episcopal Conference of Bishops, the Archbishop of Reims, Eric de Moulin-Beaufort. Holy Father, your presence at the conclusion of the third edition of the Mediterranean Encounters strongly attract the attention of everyone. He's thanking the President of France for his presence, the ministers, the mayor,
la présidente du département et de la métropole et de tous les responsables
other dignitaries who are